If you're in your 50s and 60s and starting to seriously think about retirement planning, there is probably a 3-letter term that's popped up a few times. That 3-letter term, RMD, Required Minimum Distributions. Most people hear that and they think, okay, that's a problem for my 70s. But by the time that you actually have to start taking RMDs, your options are a lot more limited. The best planning for RMDs happens before you retire. So today I'm going to walk through what you really need to know about required minimum distributions before you have to start taking them. We're going to go over what they are, why they matter, and why they matter for your taxes, and a few smart moves you can make ahead of time. Okay, so let's talk about what an RMD really is. So an RMD, or required minimum distribution, is basically the government's way of saying you got a tax break when you put money into these accounts, into your IRA, into your 401k, and at some point, we want to start taxing that money when it comes out. So these are pre-tax contributions, which is the majority of the contributions that go into 401ks and IRAs. So once you hit a certain age, currently for most people, it's in their early 70s, and it's going to be rising from 73 to 74 to 75 for a lot of people out there. This chart right here will tell you when your RMD starts by your birth year. Now, there's nothing to say that that couldn't change. The RMD age has changed many times before, but currently, as of this December 2025, this is the most updated chart for when your RMDs start. So when RMDs start, you are required to pull out a minimum amount out of your pre-tax accounts each year. That includes accounts like traditional IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, and 457 plans. Now, there are some exceptions to the required minimum distribution rule if you are still working and have a 401k, 403b, or 457. So just know, if you are still working, there may be some exceptions to your required minimum distributions. But if you're not working, if you are retired and have money in one of those account types, there's a very good chance that you will have a required minimum distribution. Each year, the IRS looks at your account balance and your age, and they publish a factor, a divisor factor, that divides the balance by that factor, and that's roughly how your RMD is calculated. You can look up the tables that are associated with RMDs to see what your divising factor is. I wouldn't advise for that. It gets a little bit complicated. I'll put a link in the video description of a calculator that I use a lot. It's not perfect, and by all means, check with your financial advisor to make sure that that is the correct amount, but it's one that works pretty well. So with RMDs, it does not matter if you need the money or not. Once RMDs start, you have to withdraw at least that minimum amount, whether you need it or not. And if you don't, the IRS can charge a pretty nasty penalty on the amount that you should have taken out. That used to be 50%, they've lowered it down to 25%, and sometimes it can be just 10%. But either way, this is not something you want to ignore. That's a pretty hefty penalty. Okay, so you may say that that makes sense, but why do I need to care about this now if I'm still years away from retirement? Well, the reason is it can affect your taxes in retirement. It can also affect your cash flow, and in some cases, it can affect things like Medicare premiums and taxation on your Social Security. Required minimum distributions coming out of your 401k or out of your IRA or one of those other retirement accounts that are pre-tax is treated as taxable income. So if you spent your whole career diligently stuffing money into your 401k and building up a balance, that's great. But it does mean that once RMDs kick in, the required withdrawals can be much larger than you may have expected. If your accounts are rising, which assuming that they are reasonably invested and the stock market is going up, which it in more years is than isn't, you can expect your required minimum distribution amount to go up unless you are pulling out more than your required amount. So all that to say, if the markets are rising, you could see a RMD amount that is steadily increasing every year. So with larger required withdrawals, that could push you into a higher tax bracket. That could increase the portion of your Social Security that is taxable. And it could potentially push your income high enough that your Medicare premiums go up as well. Those are the IRMAA surcharges that you may have heard about. So the planning opportunity is now, before RMDs start. You have more flexibility that way, and you can decide which accounts to pull from. you can consider things like Roth conversions, which is just moving money from a pre-tax account into a Roth. And you can smooth out the tax bill over time instead of waiting for a big spike in your 70s. Okay, so what can you do? Well, let me give you a few simple practical steps. So get a rough estimate of what your future expected required distributions are. You have to be perfect here, but it helps just to get a ballpark. Ask your advisor or use one of the calculators that I'll be linking in the video's description. Look at your traditional IRA, 401k, and other pre-tax balances. Those balances determine what your required minimum distribution will be. Project out what their growth will be over the next few years. So if my money grows at X percent, what might my RMD look like when those begin, when I'm 73, 74, 75, whatever it is, depending on your birthday. If the markets take a drop, okay, well, you plan for it anyway. But seeing those rough numbers on paper can be a big eye-opener because it turns this from a vague concept into something very real and very real numbers that you can plan around. So the second thing to think about is when to use Roth strategies. So if you're in your 50s or 60s, this is often the window where things like Roth 401k contributions or backdoor Roth IRAs or Roth conversions may make some sense. Now, the goal isn't Roth at all costs. The goal is to balance your current tax bracket and your expected future tax bracket, and the size of your pre-tax accounts that will eventually be subject to RMDs. Now, something I didn't mention yet is that required minimum distributions do not apply to Roth 401ks or Roth IRAs. So that's a big reason why a lot of people look at moving money into a Roth account. Another thing that you can look at is qualified charitable distributions, or QCDs. Now, these are gifts to a qualified charity after you've turned 70 and a half, where that money comes directly from an IRA. So if you're already giving money out of your checking account to a church or some other charity, you can instead pull money out of your IRA and send that to your charity. And that way you are lowering down that account size. It will be less affected by required minimum distributions, and it's for money that you're already planning on giving anyway. Another thing could just be making larger distributions in years where your income is lower. So if you have years, for example, before you start Social Security, you know your income is going to rise when that Social Security begins. So now, let's say it's in your early 60s or late 50s. Now may be the time to pull money out of your IRA, assuming you're older than 59 and a half and don't get penalized. Now may be a good time to take money out of that IRA to lower down your future balance while you're in a low-income year. So focus on your planned distributions. Can you take money out before RMDs begin? And should you take money out before RMDs begin? So to recap, RMDs are the government's way of saying it's time to start taking money out of your pre-tax accounts. They are taxable, so if you don't plan ahead, the RMDs can push you into a higher tax bracket than you expected. And the best time to plan for RMDs is before you start them. So that's all I want to cover today. If you found this helpful and you'd like for someone to look at the numbers for your particular situation and see what your required minimum distributions are, you can find a link to schedule with me in the video's description. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in another video.